Think of someone who left your life and never came back. Now notice something. You can still hear how they'd respond to what I just said. That's not nostalgia. That's a working model of a person your brain refuses to delete, and there's a reason it won't let go. Most people assume this is just memory. A leftover file, slowly fading, harmless. That's not quite right, because what's actually happening is far more active than remembering, and far stranger. In the 1990s, psychologist John Bargh at Yale began studying something called mental representations of others, internal models we build of the people closest to us. His research found these models aren't static snapshots. They're running simulations, constantly updated, capable of generating new responses to situations that person never actually witnessed. In other words, you're not just recalling that person. Some part of your brain is still consulting them. Ask yourself what your mother would think of a decision you made last week, and you'll get an answer instantly. Not a memory of something she said, a prediction generated live based on a model your brain built and kept running long after she stopped being in the room. That model doesn't check whether the person is still around to update it. Here's where it gets stranger. In 2007, researchers led by neuroscientist Naomi Eisenberger at UCLA ran an experiment using a simple online ball-tossing game. Participants believed they were playing with real people. When those players started excluding them, leaving them out of the game, the brain scans showed something unexpected. The same regions that activate during physical pain lit up, the anterior cingulate cortex, the same circuitry responsible for the sting of a burn or a broken bone. Social loss and physical injury share hardware in your brain. Losing someone doesn't just feel like pain, metaphorically. It activates the same alarm system your body built to protect you from actual physical damage, which means your brain isn't being dramatic when it treats a breakup or a falling out like an emergency. As far as your nervous system is concerned, it is one. But that still doesn't explain why the model stays active for years after the person is gone. For that, you need to understand what your brain thought it was building in the first place. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar spent decades studying human social bonds and found that our brains evolved to track roughly 150 relationships in meaningful detail, a number now known as Dunbar's number. But within that 150, a smaller inner circle, usually 5 to 15 people, gets a different kind of processing entirely. These aren't just contacts. They're what Dunbar called your support clique, the people your ancestors' survival once depended on. Losing one of them wasn't a social inconvenience. It could mean losing access to food, protection, or care during illness. Your brain didn't evolve in a world with casual, low-stakes relationships. It evolved in a world where every person in your inner circle was a resource you might die without. So when someone in that circle leaves, your brain doesn't file it as relationship ended. It files it as a potential threat to your survival. And threats to survival don't get quietly deleted. They get monitored. That monitoring is the museum. Psychologist Philip Shaver, building on attachment research, described this as an internal working model, a term for the mental blueprint your brain builds of every person it decides matters. Once built, these models are remarkably resistant to deletion, even when the actual relationship is long over. Shaver's research found something particularly uncomfortable. The intensity of an internal working model isn't correlated with how good the relationship was. It's correlated with how unresolved it was. Relationships that ended with closure, a clear goodbye, a mutual understanding, tend to fade faster. Relationships that ended abruptly, with silence, with things unsaid, with questions that never got answered, get preserved in unusually high detail. Your brain isn't holding on to the people who treated you best. It's holding on to the ones who left the most open loops. This is why you can still perfectly simulate an argument with someone you haven't spoken to in a decade, but you'd struggle to remember the exact voice of a childhood friend who moved away on good terms. Unfinished business gets better security in the museum than finished business does. There's a final layer to this, and it might be the most human part of the whole mechanism. Grief researcher George Bonanno, after decades studying how people cope with loss, found that most people don't actually move on from significant relationships in the way that phrase implies. Instead, they undergo something he called continuing bonds, maintaining an internal relationship with someone who is gone, sometimes for the rest of their life, without it being unhealthy or a sign of unresolved grief.